4 cop cars tore up my gravel driveway, sirens screaming, lights blinding, guns halfway drawn, while I stood there in flip-flops holding a spatula, mid-flip on a burger. By the time they realized who I was, 2 officers were practically saluting me. And it all started because our HOA president, Karen Dorsey, thought I was leading a terrorist cell out of my backyard. Alright, let's rewind a bit, because none of this madness with Karen and the HOA happened in a vacuum. I should probably tell you who I am. Name's Daniel Carter, though most folks who've ever served with me just call me Tank. That nickname stuck sometime around my 3rd tour when I dragged a wounded Humvee driver out of a burning vehicle and then used the wreckage as cover while holding off a group of insurgents. The guys said I had the grace of a battering ram and the survival instinct of a cockroach. I took it as a compliment. After I left the service, I joined a regional SWAT unit. That life, high-stakes raids, hostage situations, drug busts that could flip at any second, it burns you out. It's like running a race every day where second place means a body bag. So after a while, I stepped back. I consult now, mostly training younger teams, helping write protocol, that kind of thing. It keeps me in the game without being on the front lines. The thing that kept me sane through it all? This place. I inherited a log cabin from my grandfather. It sits at the edge of a community called Pine Valley Estates, out past where the asphalt ends and the HOA rules begin to think they own the trees. Grandpa built it himself back in the 70s, hand-carved logs, rough stone chimney, wrap-around porch wide enough to land a small plane on. He always said that land should feel earned. That house felt earned. For him. For me. After my dad died, he was a firefighter, went down in a warehouse collapse. I spent every summer here with my grandfather. He'd teach me how to gut trout, how to shoot straight, how to split wood without wrecking your back. But more than anything, he taught me that when the world gets loud, you need to have a place where it's quiet. That's what this cabin became for me. Not just a house, a reset button. It's surrounded by tall pines that hum when the wind shifts, with a dirt road that keeps out everyone who doesn't mean to be there. When I'm here, I'm not Tank. I'm not the guy who trained rookies how to breach doors or the one they call when a hostage situation goes south. I'm just a guy flipping burgers on a Saturday, drinking a cold one, arguing about whether you toast buns on direct or indirect heat. Every couple of weeks I invite some of my old SWAT team buddies over. Not for anything formal. We don't reenact drills or talk tactics unless someone brings it up. We just hang out, shoot the shit, grill, breathe. There's Phoenix, who probably should have been a lawyer instead of busting down doors. Guy's got a mind like a courtroom chess master. He used to write legal briefs for fun. I'm not kidding. Then there's Ghost. Real name's Martinez. Quietest dude I know. Back in the field, he'd pick up on stuff others missed. The kind of guy who'd notice a broken shoelace on a perp and deduce where they stashed the weapon. Brass is the comic relief. Built like a linebacker. Appetite like a bear. Heart like a golden retriever. And Sage, our old sniper, he's the kind of man who speaks maybe 10 words in a weekend, but every one of them matters. These guys are my brothers. We've been through stuff together I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, and that makes these weekends sacred. Not sacred like church, sacred like survival. You deal with death all week, you need a place where you can live. Now, full disclosure, Pine Valley Estates isn't exactly the kind of place where people love outsiders, even if those outsiders are just men with buzz cuts and veteran plates trying to grill some ribs. It's one of those neighborhoods where everyone's lawn looks the same and the mailboxes match. The kind where folks wave but watch too closely from behind blinds. There's an HOA, of course, because God forbid someone has a boat in their driveway or the wrong kind of mulch. When I first moved in full-time, after Grandpa passed, it wasn't terrible. I figured I'd keep my head down, pay the HOA fees, keep the noise down, and mind my business. I mean, I wasn't exactly throwing ragers, you know? I was barbecuing with guys who call each other sir in their sleep. But apparently, just existing in cargo shorts and a ball cap was enough to set off certain people. Specifically, Karen Dorsey. But I'll get to her. All you need to know right now is that my cabin, my land, my little slice of earned peace, it meant everything to me. I'd bled for this country. I'd buried friends. I'd missed holidays, birthdays, a dozen, last calls, and just one more rounds because duty called. That cabin, that was the only place in the world where no one could call me unless I let them. So when someone decided to come for that, come for my space, my people, my sanity, I wasn't going to roll over. I may have retired the gear bag, but believe me, I never hung up the fight. And it turns out, some HOA presidents don't know when they've picked the wrong target. The first time Karen Dorsey made herself known to me, it was over laughter. Yeah, laughter. It was a Saturday afternoon. We were out back at the cabin, me and the guys, doing our usual thing. Nothing crazy. Phoenix had just finished trying to explain why putting pickles on a burger was a war crime. Ghost was sitting there silently judging us all with his arms crossed, and Brass was about 2 seconds from snapping a spatula in half over another grill argument. Sage had made a dry comment, something about how we were more dysfunctional than any hostage negotiation he'd ever seen, and we all just lost it. Real, belly-aching kind of laughter. That stupid, joyful kind that only comes when you're around people who've seen you at your worst and still show up anyway. Anyway, maybe 30 seconds after that wave of laughter died down, I noticed her. She was standing at the edge of my property line, arms crossed, mouth pinched so tight it looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there like some suburban scarecrow sent to guard the sanctity of hedges and homeowner rules. At first, I thought she might be lost, or maybe just one of those overly curious neighbors you see in movies, the kind who just happened to be walking by. So I walked over, easy pace, hands open, polite smile, real howdy neighbor energy. I figured, okay, maybe she's never seen 5 military-age guys cooking ribs and playing classic rock on a Bluetooth speaker before. Maybe she just wants to make sure we're not sacrificing goats or building a doomsday bunker. "Afternoon," I said. "You Daniel Carter?" she asked, voice clipped like she was reading from a parking citation. "I am," I said, still trying to be friendly. "Can I help you with something?" "You're aware of the HOA noise policy?" she snapped. Now, mind you, we weren't blasting music, we weren't shouting over jet engines. We were maybe playing Tom Petty at a conversational volume. You could still hear the breeze rustling the trees. I've heard lawnmowers louder than us. "I'm familiar with it," I said carefully. "Is there a problem?" She blinked like I'd just asked her to recite the Constitution. Then she pulled out this tiny notepad, yes, an actual notepad, and jotted something down with a stubby little pencil. "There have been reports," she said, not looking up, "of excessive noise, foul language, and possible alcohol consumption in plain view of the road." Now, the road she's talking about, it's a dirt road that wraps past my property and dead ends at a locked gate. If a squirrel gets lost back there, it counts as rush hour. As for the plain view part, you'd have to stand on a tree stump with a pair of binoculars just to see our picnic table through the trees. Still, I kept it cool. "Well, ma'am, we're just having a quiet get-together," I told her. "Nothing out of the ordinary. We've got burgers on the grill and sodas in the cooler, and I don't think anybody's used a swear word all day unless you count pickle abomination." Karen didn't laugh. Karen didn't smile. She just clicked her pen again. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the HOA," she said. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a militia camp." I almost laughed. I really did. But I saw something in her eyes that stopped me. It wasn't just that she disliked us. She feared us, or maybe it was more accurate to say she didn't understand us, and because she didn't, she needed to control us. The weird thing is, part of me felt bad for her in that moment, like what kind of person walks around looking for violations to enforce instead of friends to meet? What kind of life do you have if the highlight of your Saturday is scribbling on a notepad about possible alcohol in plain view? Still, I nodded. I wasn't going to escalate. We had too many years of real fights under our belts to start one over someone's warped sense of neighborhood order. "All right, well, thanks for letting me know," I said. "We'll keep it down." "You do that?" she sniffed, turning on her heel like she was marching in a parade nobody asked for. I watched her walk back down the road, clipboard flapping in the wind like a badge of honor. The guys asked me what that was all about. I told them it was nothing, just some neighborly feedback. But deep down, I felt it. That wasn't a warning. That was a warning shot, and something about the way she walked off, like she'd just scored a victory nobody else recognized, told me this wasn't going to be the last time Karen Dorsey showed up on my doorstep with that damn notebook and a mouth full of vinegar. I should have trusted that feeling. Because that little complaint? That was just her opening move. I wish I could say that little run-in with Karen was the end of it, that maybe she just needed to vent or assert her authority once to feel better, and then she'd go back to whatever HOA presidents do when they're not sniffing for rule violations, like alphabetizing mailbox paint samples or organizing the annual fern trimming bylaws. But no, that was just her warm-up act. What came next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, deliberate, calculated even. That's the thing about people like Karen Dorsey. They don't throw punches. They pull strings. About a week after her visit, I got a letter. Not a real letter. A passive-aggressive, pre-formatted notice folded into a bright yellow envelope with HOA letterhead. It was titled Courtesy Warning, which is like getting a friendly threat. It claimed that I was in violation of community standards for gatherings that exceed residential noise expectations and disruption of visual harmony. I'm not kidding, that's what it said. Visual harmony. I stared at it, dumbfounded. All I could think about was how I'd spent that weekend sitting on my porch, listening to acoustic blues and watching Phoenix rearrange the cooler 6 different times because he didn't like how the beer cans were sorted. The loudest sound that whole day was Brass dropping a spatula and shouting, "Son of a," before catching himself because there were kids riding bikes down the road. So I called the HOA office. A woman answered, sweet voice, way too chipper for someone who had to work under Karen, and I asked if this notice was a mistake. She said no, it had been submitted anonymously but logged by the acting president. Right. I asked if there had been any actual complaints by neighbors, like real people, not just the watcher of the community with her notebook, and she just kind of went quiet for a second, then said, "I'm not at liberty to disclose that." Which is HOA code for "you know who sent it, we know you know, but we're still going to pretend we don't." Fine, whatever. I let it go, until it started happening more. One Saturday, Ghost shows up with his usual quiet nod, and he notices a small white box mounted under one of the trees near the road. It's tucked low, almost camouflaged with the bark. He doesn't say anything right away, he just walks over like he's checking for squirrels or something, then kneels down and taps it with 2 fingers. It's a camera. Hidden trail cam, infrared, pointed directly at the front of my house. I stood there with my arms crossed, staring at it like it might blink. My stomach twisted, not because I had something to hide, but because I recognized what this was. Surveillance. That wasn't someone worried about noise. That was someone gathering evidence. We pulled the footage off the SD card. Don't ask me how. We had Ghost. He could get a toaster to talk. The footage showed everything. Us walking around the property, unloading gear bags from our trucks, setting up chairs. Nothing illegal, nothing threatening. But when you watch a bunch of former SWAT guys move around, even if they're carrying barbecue tongs instead of rifles, it looks coordinated. And that's exactly what Karen was counting on. The footage was never reported. Not then. But it was obvious what she was doing, building a case in her mind. Something she could stitch together into a narrative that made her the hero of her own little Cold War. Then came the second letter. This one wasn't a courtesy warning. It was an official notice of review. It claimed there were concerns over military behavior within a residential space, visible tactical equipment, and unauthorized use of radio communication devices. She was talking about our walkie-talkies, which, to be fair, we still had from the job and sometimes used out of habit. Half the time, they weren't even turned on, just sitting on the table next to the chips. But to someone like Karen? That was enough to imagine black helicopters circling overhead. Brass tried to laugh it off, said, "Guess we're the HOA's most elite threat now." Phoenix didn't laugh. He was already checking local ordinances, muttering under his breath about residential rights and abuse of administrative power. I tried to stay calm. Honestly, I did. I didn't want war. I didn't want drama. But it was getting harder to ignore the feeling that Karen wasn't just annoyed. We were her mission. Sage spotted another trail cam 2 days later, this one zip-tied to a fence post farther down, angled to catch our backyard. That's when I realized she wasn't watching from her window anymore. She'd expanded her operation. She was surveilling us, recording us, documenting us, like we were enemy agents. The final straw, though? The letter slipped under my door. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded sheet of paper with Karen's handwriting. It read, "Ongoing tactical activity on your property has raised serious community concern. If this persists, I will be forced to escalate this to the appropriate authorities." That was it. No signature, no HOA seal. Just a handwritten note that was equal parts vague threat and bureaucratic chest-puffing. I sat with it for a while. I didn't show it to the guys, not right away. I wasn't sure if I should. See, people like Karen don't come at you directly. They bleed you slowly. Death by paperwork and paranoia. And the worst part? They know exactly how to hide behind the rules while breaking them. The next Saturday, I was standing by the grill again, trying to shake it off, when I caught a glint across the road. Binoculars in a window, not even trying to hide it anymore. She stood there, staring at us like we were plotting the downfall of Western civilization with a cooler full of Coors Light and a Bluetooth speaker. Phoenix saw it too. He didn't say anything. Just looked at me and said, "She's escalating." Yeah, she was, and we had no idea how far she was willing to go, but we were about to find out. At first, I still believed we could handle this like adults. I mean, maybe that sounds naive considering the camera in my trees and the notes under my door, but I really thought there had to be a way to de-escalate things. I've negotiated with armed criminals. I've defused hostage takers. I figured surely one uptight HOA president wasn't going to break me. So I did what I thought was the smart, responsible thing. I walked across the street. Karen's house sat near the front of the community, big wraparound porch, columns she probably thought made her look like a southern senator. Her yard was a showcase of strict landscaping, like a botanical garden with anxiety. Everything in exact symmetry, 2 bird baths, same flowers mirrored left and right, American flag centered just so. I knocked on her door, gave it a beat, and when she opened it, I gave her my calmest, most respectful, let's just talk smile. She didn't smile back. She just looked at me through the crack in the door like I was holding a severed head and a Bluetooth speaker blasting death metal. Karen, I said, I wanted to see if we could clear the air. She didn't invite me in, didn't step out, just kept one hand on the door, one eye on me. There's nothing to clear, she said. You've chosen to operate outside the community norms. That's your decision. I blinked. We're not operating anything. We're grilling burgers and catching up. There's no plan to overthrow the HOA. That didn't get a laugh. It didn't even get a smirk. Karen's face was stone. You bring in men with tactical equipment, she said. I've observed military gear, comms devices, strategic positioning. I raised my eyebrows. You mean chairs in the shade and walkie-talkies that aren't even turned on? I've lived in enough neighborhoods to recognize organized behavior when I see it, she said. I almost asked, organized like the Boy Scouts? But I stopped myself. Sarcasm wasn't going to help. I swallowed it. Karen, I said slowly, you know what I do for a living. I served this country. Those guys, they're my brothers. We've been through hell together, and this place, this cabin, this is the only corner of the world where we can just breathe. That cracked something, not in her expression, but in her eyes. Something flickered, a hesitation, and then it was gone. She stepped back and said, I suggest you take your concerns to the board. Good day. And the door closed. South. That went well? Next step? I wrote a formal letter to the HOA. Nothing dramatic, just stating that I had concerns about neighborly conduct, potential boundary violations, and unlawful surveillance. Because yes, installing hidden cameras pointed onto someone else's property without consent is, in most states, a serious problem. I mailed it and emailed it. Even hand-delivered a copy to the HOA mailbox at the community office, just in case miscommunication became a convenient excuse. No reply. For a week. Then a response came, and it wasn't from a board member. It was a bland, templated message from the HOA's generic email address, signed Pine Valley Estates Administrative Committee. No names, no contact info, no reference to my letter specifically. Just a line that said, your concerns have been reviewed. All actions taken by current HOA leadership are in accordance with Article 7 of the Community Conduct Framework. Whatever that meant. Phoenix was livid. He had his laptop out before I even finished reading the email aloud. Within an hour, he'd pulled up the entire HOA charter, and sure enough, Article 7 was basically a catch-all clause that let the acting president make judgment calls in the interest of perceived community safety. Not actual safety. Perceived safety. So Karen could claim she perceived a threat, and boom, instant power. I'll give her credit, she knew the rules better than most lawyers. Still, I wasn't done. I wasn't going to roll over because she knew how to weaponize a clause. I called the county sheriff's office, told them flat out that I had reason to believe someone in the HOA was conducting unauthorized surveillance and possibly falsifying reports. That's when I hit wall number 2. Because as soon as I gave them my name and address, the tone shifted. Friendly small-town professionalism turned careful. The deputy on the line said, "Oh, you're the guy from Maple Ridge, right? The one with the cabin?" I said, "Yeah." He paused. Then, "You know we've already had multiple calls come through regarding that property. Domestic security concerns, neighborhood complaints, suspicious activity." I could hear it in his voice. The seed was already planted. Karen had been working the system long before I picked up the phone. "I've got nothing illegal happening here," I said firmly. "What I do have are cameras hidden near my property, and a woman I believe is abusing her authority under HOA bylaws." He said he'd make a note of it, said they'd look into it, then asked, "Is there an immediate threat to your safety?" I said no. He said, "Then unfortunately, there's not a whole lot we can do unless something happens." Classic. I tried going to the town zoning board next, not to start a war, just to ask if HOA enforcement had any checks or oversight. That turned into a loop of speak with your HOA, refer to your signed agreements, and we're not responsible for internal board decisions. Basically, everyone passed the buck, and every door I opened led right back to Karen. The lowest point came when I brought it up at the next HOA meeting. It was a Tuesday evening in the community center. Rows of metal chairs, bad fluorescent lighting, and about 20 neighbors, most of whom I'd never met. Karen sat at the front, presiding over the meeting like it was a court hearing and she was both judge and executioner. When I raised my hand, she ignored it for the first few minutes. I had to stand up just to be acknowledged. "Ms. Dorsey," I said calmly, "I'd like to formally address the issue of surveillance devices near my property and the repeated HOA notices being delivered without specific evidence or prior conversation." She didn't even flinch, just folded her hands like she'd been rehearsing for this moment. "Mr. Carter," she said, "your ongoing behavior has raised multiple concerns among residents. While we value privacy, we also value security. If you're uncomfortable with preventative safety measures, you're always free to appeal directly to the board, in writing." The way she said "in writing" made it sound like a challenge, like she knew I'd already tried, and failed. And then, the cherry on top? A man sitting 2 rows behind me spoke up and said, "Honestly, it has been feeling tense since those guys started coming around all the time." He didn't look at me, he just looked down at his folded hands, voice soft, like he didn't want trouble, but also didn't want to be seen supporting me. That's when it hit me. Karen had been planting this narrative for weeks, maybe months. We weren't veterans decompressing. We were a unit, a presence, a threat. We weren't grilling burgers. We were staging... what? War games? I walked out of that meeting more frustrated than I'd been in a long time. Not because they yelled, not because they threatened, because they didn't have to. They made me invisible, powerless. And that felt worse than confrontation. That was the moment I started to doubt, not myself, but the system. I'd done everything right. Tried every door, filed every form, stayed respectful, stayed inside the lines, and none of it mattered. Karen had already stacked the deck. She wasn't breaking the rules. She was the rules. And for the first time in a long time, I walked back to my cabin not as a soldier or a cop or even a man protecting what's his. I walked back as someone who realized they weren't going to stop. And if I didn't fight back soon, I was going to lose everything I'd worked so damn hard to protect. I was sitting on my porch with a cold beer, boots kicked up, staring at the trees like they might blink and offer some kind of divine advice. I was burned out. I don't mean tired, I mean hollow, like I'd been pulled through a meat grinder called community relations and spit out the other side as just another grumpy neighbor the HOA could walk all over. I'd done everything I was supposed to do. And still, here I was, public enemy #1 in Pine Valley Estates. Karen had outmaneuvered me at every turn. The cameras, the letters, the silent campaign turning neighbors into suspicious onlookers. It was a masterclass in suburban warfare. I was starting to think the next step was a drone strike disguised as a wellness check. Then came the twist. And I swear, I wasn't even looking for it. Phoenix showed up that weekend with a folder under his arm. Not a manila one. This thing was thick, spiral-bound, and printed like a policy briefing. He dropped it on the table like it owed him money. "I got curious," he said, popping open a soda, "so I pulled the incorporation documents for Pine Valley Estates HOA. I blinked. "You what now?" He shrugged like it was nothing. HOAs are nonprofits, right? So their filings, board structures, meeting minutes, tax IDs, all public record. Well, mostly, you just gotta know where to look. He flipped it open and started walking me through it, tapping pages like he was giving a TED Talk. "Here's where it gets interesting," he said. "This HOA's been in place since the late 90s, incorporated properly, annual filings, all that, except..." He stopped. "Except..." I leaned in. "Except Karen Dorsey?" he said. "She's not supposed to be the president." I sat up straighter. "Come again?" "Legally," Phoenix said, "her name isn't listed as a board member. Not on any of the filings for the last 4 years. She's not on the record at all. Now, I've dealt with a lot of crazy in my life. I've seen drug dens with more structure than this HOA. But this wasn't just overreach. This wasn't just a power trip. This was fraud." Phoenix flipped to a page and pointed at a copy of the HOA's most recent annual report. It listed 3 board members, a man named Walter Jensen, someone named Serena Cobb, and 1 vacant position. No Karen Dorsey. Anywhere. "Then how the hell is she president?" I asked. Phoenix smirked. That's what I wanted to know. Apparently, Walter Jensen, the actual president, moved out last year. The vacant seat never got filled. Serena Cobb? Phoenix tracked her down. She's living in assisted living now, early onset dementia, hasn't attended a meeting in 2 years. "So there's literally no one officially running the HOA?" I said. "Oh, someone's running it," he said. "Just not legally." Karen had slipped in like fog, quiet, slow, and everywhere all at once. She wasn't elected, she wasn't appointed, she just started acting like she was in charge, calling meetings, signing letters, handing out fines, and everyone just went with it. Probably because she was the only one who cared enough to show up and pretend to be in charge. And here's the thing about HOAs. A lot of them run on autopilot. Most neighbors don't attend meetings. They just pay their dues and hope nobody gives them grief over their mailbox color. If someone walks in, looks confident, waves a gavel, and uses enough big words, nobody questions it. Karen didn't just abuse the system, she became the system. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. She wasn't just harassing me, she was impersonating an officer of a registered nonprofit organization. That's a felony in some states, and she'd been doing it for years. The surveillance, the fines, the official notices, all of it, completely illegitimate. Phoenix handed me a second folder. "Here's the kicker," he said. "Check the financial reports. The HOA collects $400 annually per home. Multiply that by 92 homes in the neighborhood. That's over $36,000 a year." I flipped through the spreadsheet. No contractor receipts, no landscaping bills, no recorded expenses, just deposits and one checking account number. Phoenix looked me dead in the eye. "That account? It's registered to a Karen Dorsey." That was the moment everything changed. Because until that point, I thought this was about power. About a bitter woman obsessed with rules and control and silence. I figured she had a grudge, or maybe some deep-seated issue with authority. Hell, I even tried to be empathetic. Told myself maybe she lost someone in the service, maybe our presence triggered something. But no, this wasn't about grief. This wasn't about control. This was about money. Karen had turned the HOA into her own personal piggy bank, and no one noticed because she wrapped it in a tight little bow of official forms and neighborhood pride. And the only reason she came after me? I rocked the boat, I had friends, I asked questions, I pushed back. And she couldn't afford pushback. That trail cam? Evidence collection, sure, but also intimidation. The letters? Designed to exhaust me into silence. The meeting? A sham stage play where she played judge, jury, and executioner while everyone else just wanted to go home before the casserole got cold. Karen wasn't just acting like a villain, she was one. And now I had her number. I felt this thing I hadn't felt in weeks, maybe months. Power. That tight coil of frustration that had been wrapping itself around my chest finally snapped loose and I could breathe again. She'd played this whole game thinking I was just another grunt with a grill and a few loud friends. But now I had something better than intimidation. I had the truth, and the next step was making damn sure everyone else saw it too. I didn't sleep much that night. I just sat at the kitchen table, lights low, flipping through those documents Phoenix gave me. Page after page of proof that Karen Dorsey had been running the HOA like her own private kingdom. I kept rereading the account numbers, the missing signatures, the gaps in the financial records. Every line was another crack in her armor. But it wasn't enough just to know the truth. I had to prove it, publicly, thoroughly, so that when the curtain came down, she couldn't just slither into the shadows and blame clerical error or miscommunication. I needed to drag the whole thing into the daylight where everyone in Pine Valley Estates could see it for what it really was. And I couldn't do it alone, so I called the guys. We didn't meet at the grill this time, no beers, no ribs, just coffee, laptops, and a long table inside my cabin, every chair filled. Ghost showed up first. He had that look, the one that meant he was already 10 steps ahead of whatever I was thinking. Brass rolled in next, wearing that faded hoodie that made him look like a college dropout instead of a guy who used to clear buildings for a living. Phoenix was already seated, fingers tapping on his tablet like a metronome. Even Sage came, quiet, calm, unreadable as ever, but when he took his seat and looked at the folder, his jaw clenched. That was his version of outrage. I laid it all out. The fake presidency, the missing board, the financial trail, the Article 7 abuse, the weaponized paranoia. They didn't say anything right away. Nobody cracked a joke. Nobody rolled their eyes. This wasn't some HOA scuffle to them anymore. This was an op. We were trained to deal with structure, strategy, escalation, and this was a dirty little system wrapped in fake authority. It looked like bureaucracy, but under the surface, it was all intimidation and control. We started breaking it down the way we used to prep for raids. First step, evidence consolidation. Phoenix led the charge there. He started pulling every HOA filing he could find, going back 10 years, annual reports, meeting notes, newsletters, anything public, anything archived, anything buried. Ghost dug into the financials. He cross-referenced deposits against neighborhood payment schedules, pulled the routing numbers, and traced the banking institution. Same account, no oversight, no board signatures, he muttered, eyes scanning the screen. She's been collecting and spending unchecked, no reimbursements filed, no expense logs. This isn't just shady, it's embezzlement. Brass handled what we called visuals. He started creating a timeline, something we could show the community. Color-coded with receipts. Clean, clear, undeniable. Meanwhile, I started crafting the narrative, the story. Because facts are one thing, but if you want people to believe you, to feel the truth, you need more than data. You need the why. I wrote out everything she'd done, the warnings, the surveillance, the silence from the board, the way she framed us, weaponized fear, divided the neighborhood. And then I tied it back to motive. Control was the smoke, but the fire, it was the money. 36 grand a year, with no oversight and no legitimate leadership to stop her. That's why she came after me. Not because I was loud, not because I was different, because I saw her. I represented everything she couldn't control, and once she felt that threat, she did what petty tyrants always do. She overreached. By the end of the week, we had everything laid out. Phoenix had built a digital packet, one clean enough to submit to the Attorney General's office if it came to that. Ghost had confirmed that the account receiving the dues was a personal checking account, registered under Karen's name and linked to her home address. Brass turned the data into a short presentation with simple charts and pull quotes. You didn't need to be a CPA to follow it. You just had to be able to read. Sage? He made calls. Quiet ones. He reached out to a few neighbors, people who'd been on the receiving end of Karen's wrath but were too afraid or exhausted to push back. And slowly, one by one, they started to come forward. Nothing big at first. A story about being fined for painting a fence the wrong shade of beige. A letter threatening legal action for leaving a bicycle in the driveway. One woman shared how she tried to run for the board but was told the seats were filled, even though no election had taken place in years. Each story was another piece of the puzzle. Proof that Karen didn't just assume control. She seized it, manipulated it, profited from it. And now we were going to dismantle it. We weren't going to kick down doors. We weren't going to shout into the void. We were going to do this the way Karen never expected. By the book, publicly, and with precision. That's the thing about people like her. They operate in silence because they assume no one will bother to look. No one will care enough to trace the threads. But once someone does, that's when the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. We didn't need to shout to win this. We just needed to shine a bright enough light. And we were about to turn on the damn floodlights. We launched on a Tuesday. I don't know why that sticks in my head, maybe because it felt like the least dramatic day of the week. But that was the point. We weren't trying to make a scene. Not yet. We wanted quiet, clean precision. Let the first punch land before the opponent even realizes you're in the room. Brass dropped off the printed packets, full copies of everything we'd found, on the porches of 20 homes. All people we'd either spoken to directly or had a strong reason to believe were already suspicious of Karen. Nothing flashy, just a sealed envelope marked for your review HOA governance inquiry. Inside was everything. The fraudulent filings, the bank info, the evidence that Karen had no legal right to call herself president, let alone collect dues or enforce fines. We made it digestible. No legalese, just facts and receipts. Phoenix sent out the digital version to the HOA mailing list that night. The real kicker? He set up a Google Drive with clickable folders labeled financial records, board membership, surveillance allegations, and community complaints. The whole thing felt like the world's most boring FBI raid until you realized what you were actually looking at. And then we waited, but not for long. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing. First it was Dave, the guy with the redwood fence Karen made him repaint twice because it didn't match the aesthetic. Then Mrs. Pennington called, practically whispering like we were part of some underground resistance. "Oh my lord, Daniel, I always knew something was off about her," she said. "That poor Cobb woman, I thought she was still running things." Apparently, Serena Cobb hadn't been seen at a meeting in over a year, and everyone just assumed she was still involved because Karen kept referencing her by name in the newsletters. The neighbors were waking up, and man, it was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. But of course, Karen struck back. She showed up at my cabin again, this time with 2 security volunteers from the HOA, which I'm pretty sure were just a couple of retired dudes she bribed with coffee and a sense of purpose. "Daniel," she said, voice sharp enough to shave metal, "I'm going to advise you cease spreading disinformation before it becomes a legal matter." I stayed calm. I'd expected this. "Karen," I said, "everything in that packet is pulled directly from state filings and public records. You're welcome to dispute any of it, but I'd be real careful about throwing around words like legal matter. You're not exactly on firm ground there." She turned red, not just her face, her neck. You ever seen someone so mad the color creeps up like a thermometer? That was Karen. "You don't understand the position you've put yourself in," she hissed. "I have influence. I have support." "Yeah?" I said, crossing my arms. "So do I." The volunteers looked like they regretted ever getting out of bed that morning. Karen stormed off, and 2 hours later, the HOA email account sent out a community-wide message accusing me of cyber harassment, unlawful distribution of private information, and, get this, potential domestic extremism indicators. Domestic extremism. For sending neighbors PDF files. Phoenix lost it when he read that. Dude, we're one HOA meeting away from getting labeled a militia. She'd overplayed again. That was her problem. She never knew when to stop. The more control she lost, the tighter she tried to grip the wheel, and the tighter she gripped, the more people noticed the crash coming. Sage stepped in quietly, like he always does. He talked to the local paper, told them there was some community tension and that maybe they'd want to look into how funds were being handled at Pine Valley Estates. He didn't drop names, he just planted a seed. The paper ran a short column, nothing front page, just enough to raise eyebrows. And then Ghost made the final move. He filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office and the county's Nonprofit Compliance Board, with all the documents attached, everything we'd found, labeled, explained, timeline, and all. At that point, it was out of our hands. But not out of my hands, because I still had one last card to play. The community meeting. The next one was already scheduled for later that week. Karen's attempt to restore order and address malicious falsehoods. That's how she phrased it on the HOA bulletin board. I swear, the woman missed her calling in political propaganda. But I didn't care what she planned, because I wasn't walking in there alone. I showed up early and the place was packed. More people than I'd ever seen at one of those things. Chairs were full. Folks standing in the back. You could feel the air buzz. Like everyone knew something big was about to drop, but no one knew what side of it they'd land on. Karen stood at the front, arms folded, chin up, still clinging to the performance. She opened the meeting with a speech about unity, trust, and dangerous misinformation campaigns. It was all vague and dramatic, like she was trying to set the stage for a movie she hadn't finished writing. And then she called me out. Mr. Carter has taken it upon himself to distribute unfounded accusations, threaten the integrity of this community, and misrepresent this board's authority. The room went quiet. I stood up. Calm, no raised voice, no theatrics, just facts. "Everything I sent you," I said, "is verifiable through state records. Karen Dorsey has not been listed as a legal officer of this HOA for over 4 years. The dues we've all been paying, they've been going into a personal checking account under her name. No oversight, no board authorization." People started murmuring. One guy in the back said, "Wait, what?" Loud enough for half the room to hear. I held up a copy of the annual filing. Here's the last registered board. None of them are active. One of them doesn't even live here anymore. The only person collecting dues? Karen? The only person issuing fines? Karen. And the only person running meetings? Karen. She tried to cut me off. I didn't let her. I showed the email from the state compliance office confirming they'd received our complaint and were reviewing the documentation. I laid it all out, and then I stepped back, let the silence do the work. The residents looked stunned. Not angry, just woken up, like someone had lifted a fog and they were finally seeing the shape of the thing under it. Karen didn't say another word. She gathered her notes and walked out of the room. Not a word, not a glance back. Just gone. The meeting didn't end so much as it dissolved. People stood in little clumps, whispering, shaking heads, looking over the handouts Phoenix had quietly placed by the door. I didn't stick around for applause. This wasn't about vindication. Not yet. It was about momentum. And we had it now. By the end of that week, the neighborhood was buzzing. You couldn't walk your dog without someone stopping you to ask, "Is it true?" Or whispering something like, "I never liked her, you know." People who used to nod at me politely from their driveways now gave me full-on waves. A few even crossed the street just to say thanks. But that was just the beginning. The public fallout came fast. First, the local paper ran a full article. Not a front-page thing, but a decent chunk of column space titled, "HOA in Suburban Turmoil After Leadership Fraud Claims." They quoted a concerned homeowner, which I'm guessing was Sage, and went into just enough detail to make the story feel serious without sounding sensational. The real bombshell dropped 2 days later. Karen got a visit from the county inspector. That's when things went from HOA drama to full-on accountability. It turns out, when you collect tens of thousands of dollars from residents under a nonprofit's name and funnel it into your personal checking account, people take an interest. The state had opened an investigation, and someone, maybe the inspector, maybe the AG's office, froze the HOA account pending review. Now here's where it got wild. The HOA's bylaws required that all major expenses be approved by a majority vote of the board. But since there wasn't a real board, none of the expenditures Karen had made, mailers, signage, private security during events, even the damn clipboards, had been authorized. And that included the money she spent building that ridiculous wooden HOA kiosk at the neighborhood entrance that nobody used except her to post warnings and passive-aggressive messages about lawn height. The county pulled her bank records, not just the account receiving dues, but other connected ones. I don't know how deep they dug, but the rumor mill said there were all kinds of transactions flagged for review. Personal Amazon purchases, restaurant bills, even some weird recurring payment to a decorative stone supplier. Yeah, decorative stones. You can't make this stuff up. The moment things turned fully public, Karen vanished. Not literally, but she stopped leaving her house. No more walking her yappy dog around the block, no more peeking through the blinds like she was guarding Fort Knox. It was like she imploded. The once smug, clipboard-wielding dictator of Pine Valley Estates had gone radio silent. We kept the pressure up. Phoenix and Ghost coordinated with the remaining residents to hold an emergency meeting, an actual legal one this time. We posted notices like the bylaws required, sent emails, printed flyers. For once, people actually showed up, a lot of them. We gathered at the community clubhouse, a place I hadn't stepped into since I moved in because Karen basically treated it like her throne room. That night, it was ours. The atmosphere was strange, part cautious optimism, part righteous anger. Folks were tired of being bossed around, tired of the nonsense fines and letters and being made to feel like tenants in their own homes. But they were also confused, unsure of what came next, what to do with the mess left behind. So I stood up and told them everything, all of it. From the trail cams to the fake titles to the account numbers and the filings we'd uncovered. I laid it out like I had nothing to hide, because I didn't. Karen built her power through secrecy and intimidation. I was tearing it down with sunlight, and I wasn't the only one. Dave, the redwood fence guy, stepped up and shared how she fined him 4 times over the course of a year, even though the shade of his paint was approved in the original architectural plan. Then Mrs. Pennington told her story about how Karen had sent her 3 violations in a week because her niece parked a rental car in the street during a visit. And then came Ron. Ron was a quiet, older guy who kept to himself. Nobody really knew much about him. He stood up slowly, holding a faded binder in his hand. He used to be on the original HOA board, before Karen moved in. "I quit," he said, voice shaking a little, "because she made everything miserable, twisted every vote, turned neighbors against each other. Then one day, the meeting stopped, and she just kept going." He flipped open the binder and revealed original minutes from board meetings over a decade ago. Records Karen never referenced, because they didn't benefit her. And that was it. The room shifted. The dam broke. People began speaking freely, venting, sharing stories they'd kept bottled up because they thought they were alone. Turns out half the neighborhood had been bullied in some small way by Karen over the years. One guy even admitted he was fined for excessively spirited Halloween decorations. No joke. Excessively spirited. By the time the meeting wrapped, the crowd voted unanimously to suspend the current HOA leadership structure, freeze all remaining funds, and appoint an interim board made up of volunteers from the community, actual residents willing to be transparent and accountable. And they asked me to be on it. I said no. Not because I didn't care, but because this was never about power for me. I didn't want to be in charge. I just wanted the HOA to go back to what it was supposed to be, a support system, not a weapon. Karen was later served with an official cease and desist from the county. A civil lawsuit followed. And the best part? An audit of the HOA's financial records was launched, publicly announced and posted right there on the HOA's new actual website. All of it documented, all of it open for the community to see. There were no cheers, no champagne, just a long exhale. The storm had passed, and we'd come out the other side, the grill's going again. Same spot behind the cabin, same beat-up picnic table, same warped lawn chairs we've been promising to replace for years and never do. Phoenix brought ribs this time. Ghost, of all people, brought potato salad. It was store-bought and terrible, but nobody said anything because the guy once disarmed a pipe bomb with a paperclip and nerves of steel, so he gets a pass. Brass had a playlist going. Nothing fancy, some classic rock, a little Johnny Cash. And Sage? He just sat there with his boots kicked up, sipping iced tea and quietly watching everyone like always. And me? I was at the grill, flipping burgers, spatula in hand. Same as that day everything went sideways. Only this time, there were no sirens, no clipboards, no Karen. Every now and then, I still catch myself looking over toward that trail where she used to appear like a specter from the suburbs, ready to deliver judgment over grass length and recycled bins. But it's quiet now. Not empty, just calm. The neighborhood's different these days. People talk more, not just polite nods or waves, but real conversations. I've seen folks helping each other carry groceries, fixing up fences together, even starting a little garden co-op by the park. The new interim HOA board is transparent. Actually transparent. Meeting minutes get emailed out. Budgets are posted online. They even held a block party that wasn't just lemonade and awkward small talk. It was legit. Kids running around, neighbors laughing, someone brought a bounce house. I didn't think this place was capable of that kind of joy before. Karen's house has a for sale sign out front now. It went up quietly. No big announcement, no farewell party, just a white sign with a red stripe leaning into the lawn like it was tired, too. I heard she moved in with her sister a few towns over. Rumor is she's trying to join their HOA board. God help them. I've thought a lot about everything that happened. All the warnings I brushed off. The little signs I ignored. How close I came to walking away and just letting her win because the weight of it felt like too much. I still don't know what would have happened if Phoenix hadn't found those documents. Or if the guys hadn't backed me like they did. But maybe the most important part is, I wasn't alone. That's something Karen never understood. She built her power by isolating people, one letter at a time, one threat, one fine, quiet control in small doses until you didn't even realize you'd stopped fighting back. But people aren't meant to live like that. We're not meant to fear our own community. And maybe, just maybe, that's the whole point. It wasn't about the money, or the fake board, or even the damn trail cams. It was about reminding each other that we own our homes, that we have a say in the places we live, that when someone tries to rule through fear, the right answer isn't silence. It's sunlight. It's speaking up. It's flipping the damn burger, looking them dead in the eye and saying, "Not today." I still get letters sometimes, from other people in other neighborhoods, friends of friends, folks who heard what happened and want to know how we did it, how we stood up, how we won. I tell them all the same thing. You don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to know every statute or bylaw. You just need to pay attention. Ask questions. And when something feels wrong, trust that instinct. Oh, and maybe have a couple of good friends with military training and a talent for digital forensics. Can't hurt. Anyway, that's the story. No explosions, no dramatic last-minute court scenes. Just a grill, a quiet backyard, and a bunch of people who remembered what community's supposed to feel like. And for the first time in a long time, I can flip a burger in peace. Which, for me, that's the real victory.